Claude responded. I told my son I had lost the business on a Tuesday morning in April. I told my son I had lost the business on a Tuesday morning in April. I sat across from him at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework 30 years earlier, and I kept my hands flat on the wood so they wouldn't shake. Because a man's hands are the first thing that give him away when he's about to say something he has rehearsed until the rehearsal itself became a kind of lie. I told him the bank had called. I told him the numbers didn't work anymore. I told him I didn't want to scare him, but I needed him to know before it became public. He came around the table and put his arms around me, and he held on the way a son holds on when he means it with his whole body, and he cried, and it was not performed crying. I held him back. I told him it would be fine, which was true, though not for the reason he thought. Then he said he needed to step outside for a minute, and he walked out to the driveway, and I sat in my chair and I listened through the screen door. His voice came through low and urgent, the voice of a man trying to whisper something that will not stay whispered. I heard what he said because I had been listening for exactly this kind of thing since the previous autumn. What my son said in that driveway stopped me cold in my own kitchen. Not as a figure of speech. I stood at the screen door and I could not make my legs carry me forward, because what came through that mesh screen rewrote 26 years of fatherhood in under a minute, and I could not rebuild it fast enough to keep standing straight. I had told my son I was ruined to find out who he really was. He told someone else, through a screen door, exactly who that was. Welcome back to Old Man's Last Word. If you're new here, hit subscribe, and if you've been with me a while, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Let's get into it. My name is Robert Callahan. Everyone who matters calls me Bob. I'm 69 years old, and I live outside Asheville, North Carolina, on 11 acres my father bought in 1958 for less money than a used truck costs today. I built a furniture business on that land, Callahan Hardwood, starting in a 2-bay shed in 1979 with one table saw and a stubbornness that my late wife, Diane, used to say was the only inheritance my own father ever gave me, and it turned out to be the right one. By the time I sold the company in 2019, we had 41 employees, a client list that ran from Charlotte to Richmond, and a reputation built one dovetail joint at a time, because I never let a piece leave that shop with a seam I wouldn't put my name behind. The sale set Diane and me up to finally take the trip we had been promising ourselves since 1985. We had a map on the refrigerator with pins in it, Nova Scotia. The whole coast, lighthouse to lighthouse. In the fall, when the maples turn, Diane never got there. She died in the spring of 2021, an aneurysm, sudden, on a Thursday morning while she was out deadheading the roses along the porch rail, which she did every week without fail because she said a rose left to go to seed on the bush was a woman giving up on herself. And Diane never gave up on anything. She was 61. We'd been married 37 years. I need you to sit with that loss for a moment before I tell you anything else, because everything after it happened in the shape that loss carved out. My son Marcus is 39. He lives 40 minutes away in Hendersonville with his wife Priya and their daughter, who just turned 6. He runs a landscaping and hardscaping company he built himself, and he built it the way I built mine, which is to say, with his own 2 hands and not $1 of anybody's charity, and I have always been proud of that in a way I don't say out loud enough. My daughter Renee is 35 and lives in Charlotte, 2 hours up the interstate, works in hospital administration, calls me every single Sunday at 6 o'clock like she's setting an alarm for it, which in a way she is, because Renee has never once in her life let a commitment slip, not to me. Not to anyone. Renee and I have always had an easy quiet between us, the kind where you don't have to explain the joke because she was there for the version that made it funny the first time. Marcus and I have always had something harder to name, 2 men who love each other and also compete without meaning to, who measure themselves against each other's silence more than they should. Diane used to sit between us at dinner, literally and otherwise, and after she died, there was nobody sitting in that chair anymore, and Marcus and I both felt it, and neither of us said so. In the fall, after Diane passed, I started noticing things about Marcus that I want to describe carefully, because I don't want to make it sound more dramatic in the retelling than it felt at the time. He mentioned twice in September and once in October how much the 11 acres would be worth if it were subdivided, how a builder he knew had looked at comparable land outside Fletcher and thrown out a number that made his eyebrows go up. He brought it up like it was just a fact he'd stumbled into, the way you mention a ballgame score. Then in November, at Thanksgiving, he asked how the sale proceeds from the business were structured. whether they were in one account or spread out, a question with more architecture to it than the conversation called for. In December, he mentioned that Priya's father, who had spent 30 years as a financial advisor before retiring, would be happy to sit down and go over my whole financial picture. No charge, just family helping family. It was the first time in 14 years of knowing Priya's father that his services had ever been offered to me directly. Small things. A pattern building itself one loose brick at a time, the kind of pattern a man who ran a business for 40 years learns to recognize before it finishes announcing itself. I didn't say anything to Marcus in December. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. I went home and I sat in Diane's old rocker on the back porch, the one I moved out to the shop after she died because the house felt too big to sit in alone, and I thought about what I was seeing and what I might be wrong about. I did not want to be right. That's the first thing I want you to understand about the morning I sat him down and told him the business was gone. I did not want to need to test my own son. What I wanted, what I had wanted every single day since I found Diane's gardening gloves still out on the porch step the afternoon she died, was a son who called me because he wanted to hear my voice, and not because he'd done math on what my voice might be worth to him eventually. I wanted a Sunday call like Renee's, one that didn't come loaded. I needed to know, before I built one more thing on top of an assumption, exactly what I actually had. The story I invented was collapse, not catastrophe. Not a health crisis, because Marcus would have driven straight to the hospital, and there'd have been no time for anything to develop naturally, a financial one. I told him a bad supplier contract from years back had come back around as a lawsuit, that the settlement plus back taxes had cleaned out nearly everything, that the house itself might be at risk depending on how the judgment landed. I'd spent 2 weeks with a legal pad getting the details specific enough to survive a follow-up question, but not so specific that a grieving, panicked son would think to check them against public record right away. I called him on a Monday and asked if he could come by Tuesday morning before work. He said, "Of course, Dad," and I heard him catch the weight in my voice and not push for it over the phone, which I told myself was thoughtfulness, and which I later understood was something closer to preparation. He arrived at 8, still in his work boots, smelling like cut cedar from a job the day before. He sat across the table with the alert, ready posture of a man braced to receive bad news and handle it. I told him. He came around the table and held on to me for a long time, and he cried, and I held him back and told him it would be fine, and I meant it, though not the way he understood it. Then he said he needed a minute, and he stepped out to the driveway where his truck was parked, phone already halfway out of his pocket. I sat in my chair. I listened through the screen door. His voice came fast and low, pitched to stay inside the driveway and not carry, except old houses carry sound better than people think, especially through a screen that's been letting April air through since 1958. I'm going to tell you exactly what he said. But you need the shape of the moment first, because the words matter less than the timing, which was 90 seconds after he stopped crying at my kitchen table, and the person on the other end, which was Priya, and the tone which had no grief left in it at all. He said, "It's happening, just like we talked about." A pause. "I know. Listen, call your dad tonight. Tell him we need that meeting moved up before Renee hears any of this and starts asking her own questions. If the house is really exposed, we need to be the ones holding the paperwork when the dust settles." Another pause. "Renee's going to want to protect the land out of sentiment. She always does. She'll want to save the shop for old time's sake instead of thinking about what's actually smart here. If we move first, we control what gets saved and what doesn't. Then, quieter. The retirement accounts are what actually matters. Get your dad in front of those numbers this week, not next month." Then, a shift in his voice, warmer, wrapping up. "Love you. Talk tonight." And I heard the particular finality of a phone call ending, and I stepped back from the door before he turned around, and I sat back down at the table with my hands flat in front of me and nothing left in my chest. Marcus came back inside a few minutes later, eyes still red, and he sat down and took my hand across the table and said, "Dad, we're going to get through this. You are not doing this by yourself." I looked at my son and said, "I know." And I did not mean one true word I said for the rest of that morning, which was not something I had ever done in that kitchen before. Not once. Not in 39 years of him sitting at that table. He stayed 2 hours. Before he left, he mentioned, almost in passing, that Priya's dad really did know his way around a situation like this, and that it might be worth getting ahead of things before the lawsuit progressed any further. He hugged me at the door, the second long hold of the morning, and told me to call him if anything changed. And he drove off in his truck with the landscaping logo on the door that he'd designed himself at 26 years old, with nobody's money but his own. I stood on the porch in the cool April morning and thought about Diane out at the rosebed, and about who I had believed my son to be for 39 years, and about the space between that man and the one standing in my driveway with a phone against his ear. Then I went inside and called Renee. If you're still with me, drop a comment and tell me you are, because what Renee said when I called her changed the whole shape of what I did next. She picked up on the second ring. It was a Tuesday, not our Sunday slot, and she caught the wrongness in that immediately. "Dad, what's going on?" she said. And I told her everything, in order, the pattern since September, the test I'd built, the driveway, all the words that had stopped me at my own screen door. She was quiet while I talked, not shocked quiet, thinking quiet, which is how Renee has always processed things, and which is exactly why I trust her with the truth, before I trust anyone else with it. When I finished, she said, "He said before I hear about it." "Yes," I said. "He thinks I'd want to save the shop out of sentiment instead of being smart," she said. "That's what he said." "He's not entirely wrong," she said. "I would want to save it, but not because I'm not being smart, because it's yours, and you're still here, and there's nothing to divide up yet." I sat with the phone against my ear and looked out at the yard going dark early the way it does in early spring. "What do you need from me?" she said. I told her. I needed her to keep calling Sundays like nothing had changed, because on her end, nothing had, and there was no performance required of her. I needed her not to call Marcus yet. I needed her not to call Marcus yet. And I needed a name, a good estate, an elder law attorney, somebody sharp, because before anyone else got a chance to shape the story, I wanted the truth of it written down in a form nobody could argue with. Renee didn't have a name in Asheville, but she had something better, a friend from her hospital administration circles whose own father had gone through something with a shape she described as uncomfortably familiar. The attorney's name was Denise Okafor, office on Biltmore Avenue downtown, a woman Renee's friend swore by without hesitation. I called Wednesday morning at 8:15. Denise could see me Thursday at 9. I was in the parking lot at 8:40. Denise Okafor was somewhere in her late 50s, wore her reading glasses pushed up into gray hair she clearly hadn't styled for anybody's benefit but her own, and she let me talk for nearly 20 minutes without writing a single word down. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Callahan, I have 2 questions for you. First, what does your current will say?" I told her, equal split between Marcus and Renee, drawn up in 2018 by an attorney who'd since retired. The land and the shop lumped in with the general estate to be liquidated and divided, unless somebody bought the other out. "And the business sale proceeds?" she asked. "Are they in a separate account from everything else?" "They are," I said, "in my name only, set up that way from the start because of how the installment payments were structured." "Good," she said. "Second question. Legalities aside, what do you actually want the outcome to be?" I had been sitting with that question since the driveway. I want to be honest about the answer, because the distinction matters. I did not want to punish Marcus. I want to say that clearly, because there's a difference between not wanting to punish somebody and not wanting there to be any consequence at all, and those are not the same thing, and a man who confuses them usually ends up doing something in anger he can't undo 6 months later when the anger has cooled and the damage hasn't. What I wanted was for the paperwork to reflect what was actually true. I wanted the land protected from being carved up by a builder's number before I was even in the ground. I wanted Renee to know that what I had was hers, as much as her brother's, sentiment and all. And I wanted Marcus, eventually, to sit across a table from me and his sister and the plain truth of it, without a phone in his hand and a father-in-law lined up behind him. I told Denise all of that. She wrote for a long time, longer than I expected from a first meeting. When she looked up, she said, "I can build you all of that. First thing I want is a full, certified asset inventory, filed formally, so there's an accurate, documented picture of your estate before your son or anyone advising him gets a chance to put a different picture in front of you. That takes about 3 weeks. While that's happening, I want to revise the will, not the split itself, but the governance around it, the same kind of structure that keeps an estate from being managed by somebody with an undisclosed stake in the outcome. And I want to move on the land specifically, because that's where the exposure is. He mentioned a builder's number, I said. Then somebody's already told him subdivision is realistic, Denise said, which means this didn't start with him. Somebody's been feeding him the mechanics. Priya's father, most likely, if he's the one pushing the meeting. She paused. Mr. Callahan, has anyone put a document in front of you to sign since the fall? I thought about it. At Thanksgiving, when Priya's father was first mentioned, Marcus had handed me a folder at the end of the evening, called it some retirement planning material his father-in-law thought I'd find useful, nothing urgent. I'd set it on top of the microwave and hadn't touched it since. I told Denise that. Do you still have it? She asked. Probably, I said. Go look tonight, she said, and don't throw it out. I found it, exactly where I'd left it. Not retirement planning material in any general sense. One page on letterhead from a small financial advisory practice out of Hendersonville, Priya's father's practice, with their address printed right on it. On the back, in small print under a heading that read, Authorization for Account Review, a signature line, and above it, language careful enough to sound routine and broad enough to mean far more than routine. I hereby authorize the above practice to request and review documentation related to the accounts and assets disclosed herein for the purpose of financial planning services. A signature line, on the back of a folder handed to me at a family dinner. I called Denise from my own kitchen that night. Don't sign it, she said. Scan it. Send it to me now. I did. She called back the next morning. Mr. Callahan, that authorization, if signed, gives that practice standing to request your account documentation directly from your institutions. It isn't power of attorney, but it's a door, and once it's open, a determined person can walk quite a bit further through it than you'd expect. This came to you disguised as a folder of retirement reading, she said. I want you to sit with that for a second. I sat with it. The folder that wasn't a folder. The father-in-law positioned as a helpful family resource who was apparently already 3 moves into something with real architecture to it. The words in the driveway, before Renee hears any of this, which weren't a reflex to bad news, they were step 2 of something that had a step 1 back in September and, I had to assume, a step 3 waiting. My son had not driven to my house on a Tuesday morning and cried real tears out of love alone. He had also been executing a plan, and the execution had been smooth enough, and the tears real enough, that if I hadn't been standing at that screen door, if I'd been the man he believed he was managing instead of the man who built the test, I never would have caught it for what it was. Denise, I said, how fast can we move on the land? 3 weeks for the inventory if we do it right, she said. Will revision? I can have drafted in 10 days. The land protection I can file within the week as a trust transfer, which means it's secured before anything else settles. Do the land first, I said. The trust transfer filed on a Wednesday, 8 days after my first sit-down with Denise. 11 acres, and the shop moved into a trust. Denise as independent trustee, Renee as co-trustee. Terms built so that no sale could happen without an independent appraisal and co-trustee sign-off. No family member or family member's associate involved as buyer, agent, or advisor without written co-trustee consent. The land was protected on a Wednesday. Marcus called Friday to check in on me. I said I was managing, that the lawyer had given me some things to think through, and left it there. He said to call if I needed anything, and I thanked him and hung up and sat in Diane's rocker and just breathed for a while. The asset inventory came back complete in 21 days, thorough, Denise called it, which from her, I understood was the highest compliment available. Thanks for watching. Renee drove down the weekend it finished, and I laid out the whole real picture for her at the kitchen table, actual numbers, because she'd been calling every Sunday trusting the family was what it had always been, and she deserved the truth of it. She sat with it a long while. Then she said, Dad, how long have you known, before the test? Since September, I said. I wish you'd called me in September, she said. I know, I told her. I thought it might be nothing. It wasn't nothing, she said. We ate at that table and talked about her job, about her nephew growing up too fast to track between visits, about Nova Scotia, which I hadn't been able to say out loud since Diane died. Mom had a whole route mapped out, Renee said. Did you know that? No, I said. She showed me in 2020, Renee said. She told me she was going to drag you up that coast the second the business sale cleared, whether you wanted to go or not. I sat there thinking about a map I'd never seen, and a woman determined to use it whether I liked it or not, and I would have liked it completely. We should go, Renee said. This year. You and me. Find that route, I said. She smiled, Diane's exact smile. Already looking, she said. The will was finalized on a Friday, 3 weeks after the land trust filed. Denise called at 4 that afternoon and told me everything was signed, sealed, and I was covered in every direction she could think to check, and she'd checked every direction. I thanked her, made myself dinner, set one place at the table the way I did on nights it was just me, simply but not carelessly, because Diane used to say a man who quits setting his own table has quit expecting anybody to sit down with him, and I wasn't going to let that happen to me. Then I called Marcus and asked him and Priya to come for Sunday dinner. Sunday in April, in the mountains outside Asheville, still has a little bite to it in the evening, but the dogwoods were already going white along the fence line, faster than people expect up here. Marcus and Priya pulled in at 5:30. He looked the same as always, capable, a little tired around the eyes the way a man gets when he's running his own crew. Priya had the easy warmth she'd always had with me, which made the whole evening harder in a way I hadn't fully braced for. Renee was already there, had driven down that afternoon, sitting in the front room when they walked in, and I watched something move fast across Marcus's face when he saw her there, faster than he could smooth it over. We ate. The conversation had the careful shape of a table where two people know something is coming and two don't. Priya asked Renee about work. Renee answered her fully, easily, the way she answers everybody, and I watched her and thought about a woman who doesn't need to perform warmth because it's simply what's there in her. After dinner I said there was something I needed to tell them. I said, back in April I told you the business had collapsed under a lawsuit and I might lose the house. I want you to know now that none of that was true. I'm not in any legal trouble. I had a lawyer go through everything with me, and the truth is, I'm fine. The table went still. Marcus looked at me, and something moved across his face that told me more in 3 seconds than the driveway had told me in 90, and it wasn't relief, not first, not mainly. It was something closer to the look of a man realizing the ground he thought he was standing on has already shifted somewhere behind his back. You said there was a lawsuit, he said. I said something serious had happened, I told him. I'd chosen the words carefully. What was serious wasn't a lawsuit. It was what I'd started noticing. What you'd been noticing, he repeated. Since September, I said. The land comments. The financial advisor. The land comments. The folder with the signature line on the back, handed to me at Thanksgiving. Priya went very still beside him. I needed to know who you were, I told Marcus. Not who you are at a Sunday table when nothing's wrong. Who you are when something breaks, and there's a decision to make about what matters most. He didn't say anything. You went out to the driveway, I said. You called Priya and told her. Before Renee hears any of this, we need to be the ones holding the paperwork. Get your dad in front of the retirement accounts this week. The quiet that followed was the specific quiet of a man discovering that a wall he'd believed was solid had a gap in it the whole time, and somebody had been standing on the other side of that gap listening. Dad, he started. Dad. The land, I said, is in a trust. Denise as independent trustee, Renee as co-trustee, filed 3 weeks ago. What you and your father-in-law were building toward isn't possible under it. And that's not punishment. That's protection. The will's been redone, same split it's always been, but with terms that keep one beneficiary from managing things at the other's expense. And the authorization your father-in-law sent home disguised as reading material that's documented in the estate file now, permanently, as part of the record. Priya's father hadn't come to dinner, but I looked at Priya anyway. Whether you knew exactly what that document did when it went out the door, I don't know, I said. Whether your father knew, I think he did. Priya said nothing. There wasn't much available to say. I looked at Marcus. He had his hands flat on the table the way people do when they need something solid under them. His eyes had that particular brightness of a man holding something back, and I couldn't tell from across the table what it was, and I'd been unable to tell for long enough that I wasn't going to guess anymore. Marcus, I said, I'm not asking you to explain the driveway. What I heard was clear enough on its own. What I'm asking is whether there's a version of tonight that's honest. Not the managed version you and your father-in-law have been building toward. The real one. What you actually need, said straight out. No folder, no financial advisor, no phone call from the driveway. He was quiet, a long time. Priya didn't say anything either. which I later understood was exactly what Renee had asked her to do without me even having to say it. Just be present and let it happen. Finally, Marcus said, the company's underwater. Not from lack of work, he said, from equipment. 2 seasons back, I financed a second crew. New trucks, new mowers, all of it. Betting on growth that didn't come the way I planned. And the payments have been eating me alive for 2 years and I haven't told anybody, not Priya's parents. Not you, nobody. A pause. In Priya's dad is a real resource. He really is good at what he does. But I sent him at you sideways instead of just asking you myself, because I couldn't stand the idea of asking you directly. What would that have looked like? I said. And, like I was coming to you for money again, he said, the way I always seemed to end up doing when we were kids. Like I never learned how to run my own life without you bailing me out eventually. Like admitting I'd built something that was already cracking. I sat with that. Diane had said something like it once, not about money specifically, about the shape underneath it, that Marcus needed so badly to be seen as the one who didn't need anybody that the needing itself had become the thing he was ashamed of, and the shame is what built the distance between us more than any single decision ever did. She'd said it gently. The way she said things about our children that she never wanted turned into a verdict against them. I hadn't used it as a verdict. I'd filed it away as something she understood that I was still catching up to. Marcus, I said, you could have called me in September and told me the truth. I would have listened. He looked at the table. I know, he said. What you did instead, the folder, the driveway call, moving before Renee even heard about it. I can't undo what that did to me when I understood it. But I want to separate it from who you are. You are not those things. Those things are what fear does to a man who's too proud to ask for what he actually needs. He looked up at me. I'm afraid of asking for what I need, he said. I know, I told him. You come by that honestly. Renee made a sound across the table, not quite a laugh, the closest thing the moment had room for. Marcus looked at his sister, and something passed between them. The particular thing that passes between siblings sitting with a truth that belongs to both of them for the first time. What's the actual number? Renee asked. He told her. She did the math out loud, quick, the way she does everything. That's not a crisis, she said. That's a loan. Structured properly. Documented. Comes off your share when things settle, clean. And Dad knows from day one. No more folders. Clean, I said, looking at my son. That's one way to do it, I told him. Marcus looked at Renee, then at me, then down at the table, and pressed his hands flat against it, and breathed out slow. I should have just told you in September, he said. Yes, I said. You should have. I'm sorry, Dad. I looked at my son, 39 years old, his mother's stubborn jaw, and a business bleeding out from under him, and a fear he'd been hauling around so long he'd built an entire scheme to avoid just naming it out loud. The scheme had been a bad one. The fear underneath it, I recognized completely. I know you are, I said. We stayed at that table until almost 9. Priya didn't say much for most of it, which was the right call, and I respected her more for it than I expected to. Marcus and Renee talked about the business the way they'd never talked about it before, straight on, the way people talk once they've been in the room with the truth, and decided to stay in it instead of managing around it. I made coffee at 9:30 because Diane always made coffee at 9:30, and the habit belonged to the house as much as to her. 4 cups on the table. We talked about easier things after that, and by the time Marcus and Priya left around 10, the table had lost most of the weight it carried when the evening started. Marcus hugged me at the door, the long kind, the real kind. I held him back and didn't tell him it was all right, because it wasn't, not completely, and he knew it same as I did, and some things need saying accurately, even inside a hug. What I told him was, your mother would have had this conversation with you back in September. He laughed against my shoulder, the broken kind of laugh a person makes when they're crying and laughing at once, and said, I know. She used to tell me needing help was just being honest about what you needed. I forgot. Remind yourself, I said. He said he would. I watched his taillights go down the drive and stood out on the porch until the cold reminded me I was 69 years old standing outside without a coat. I went in and watered Diane's 2 ferns, the ones I'd kept alive through 2 years on my own somehow. I sat down in her rocker by the window. Renee came and sat across from me with her phone out, and she turned the screen toward me, a scanned page in Diane's handwriting, dense and looping the way she wrote everything, a heading across the top that read Nova Scotia, first pass, dated 2020. I looked at it a long time. First pass, I said. She was still working on it, Renee said. There's notes in the margins. I found 2 more versions on her old laptop. I looked at my daughter. We're going, I said. When? She asked. This fall, I said. Maple season, like we always said. She smiled. Already looking at flights, she said. I sat in Diane's rocker in my own quiet house and thought about a woman who deadheaded roses every week of her life and mapped a coastline she never got to walk and raised 2 children who were, in the honest accounting, doing their best with what they'd been handed, which was imperfect and human and still more than enough to build something true out of. The land was protected. The paperwork said what was actually so, and somewhere on my daughter's phone, in 2 unfinished drafts of a trip Diane never got to take, she'd already done the planning. All we had left to do was go. If this one stayed with you, tell me in the comments which part hit you hardest. And if you've been carrying something you're afraid to ask for, afraid that asking makes you less of a man or less of a woman than the one everybody thinks you are, let me leave you with what Diane used to say, what she told our son, what I've carried every day since. Asking for help isn't weakness. It's just telling the truth about what you need. That's the whole of it. Tell the truth. It's enough. Come. It has always been enough. Old Man's Last Word posts a new one every week. Subscribe, ring the bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Claude responded, sometimes the truest thing a person can say is just, I need help. And the hardest part isn't the asking. It's letting go of who we think we're supposed to be. Sometimes the truest thing a person can say is just, I need help. And the hardest part isn't the asking. It's letting go of who we think we're supposed to be. Marcus didn't need a scheme, he needed courage. Fear dressed up as pride will always cost more than honesty would have. Say the real thing first. The people who love you were never grading you on how well you managed alone. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to leave you with a positive life lesson.